Hello everyone, welcome to the Alphaist podcast. I'm Peter Chen from Alphaist. Alphaist is a new fund focused on hard tech. Our mission is to empower alpha founders to propel humanity forward. The Alphaist is an in-depth conversation show. We focus on the first principles of technology and entrepreneurship, highlighting early-stage entrepreneurs, engineers, and product explorers who are changing the world. Today's episode is special. It's a crossover with LateTalk, a tech interview show from LatePost that I've always admired. This collaboration came about because our host, Manqi, recently launched a new segment, the Embodied AI Quarterly. Starting from Q1 2026, she'll be tracking the most noteworthy technical developments and industry dynamics in embodied AI every quarter. I'll be joining her from an investor's perspective to unpack what's been happening in the field. So let's dive right in. Here's my conversation with Manqi.
Welcome to LateTalk. I'm Manqi. In this episode, we start with this quarter's developments. Peter shares his takeaways from GTC in mid-March and conversations with global practitioners, while also reflecting on the past 2 years of embodied AI progress. When we get to humanoid robots, we review leading companies on both sides of the Pacific: Unitree, Galbot, Tesla Optimus, Figure, and companies that offer insights on intelligence capabilities or data approaches like Pi, Sunday, and Generalist. Then we dive into 2 cutting-edge research directions, Dexterous hands and world models. On Dexterous hands, we focus on Sharpa's progress and the debate around Optimus's tendon-driven approach. On world models, NVIDIA recently released Dream Zero, Dream Dojo, and the Ego-Scale Data Framework, proposing World Action Model. Many see this as a direction with higher ceiling than VLA. Since this is our first quarterly report, besides covering Q1 developments, we'll pull in context from the past 2 years where needed. Peter has extensive conversations with practitioners in both the US and China, so our discussion will cover global progress. You just got back from GTC in the US with fresh intel on the latest American developments. Combining what you know about the current landscape, if you had to list the top 5 of developments or events in embodied AI for Q1 2026, what would they be?
First off, the robotics and embodied AI space has been moving incredibly fast over the past few months. If I'm ranking the top 5 myself, this is going to be pretty subjective, not necessarily pure academic breakthroughs, but rather a synthesis from an investor who's been following robotics technology for years, analyzed through a market and commercial lens. Number 1 would be Unitree Spring Festival Gala performance. Over 20 Unitree G1 robots doing Kung Fu. I think this represents the highest level of hardware platform and locomotion control China has achieved today. Number 2 is Sharpa's Dexterous hand demo at CES, showing long-horizon autonomous assembly of a pinwheel. It demonstrated Dexterous hand SOTA capabilities on the global stage.
Let me add some context. Sharpa's founders are actually the 3 co-founders of Hesai, Li Yifan, Sun Kai, and Xiang Shaoqing. They started a new company together focused on embodied AI.
Right. Number 3 would be the progress on world models in Q1. The representative work here is NVIDIA's Dream Zero and Dream Dojo, attempts to apply world models to robotics. The earliest work came from ByteDance's GR2 released at the end of 2024. Which was the first time internet-scale video content was used in the pre-training of a language model to directly generate actions and manipulation effects. At the time, it was a pretty innovative attempt outside the VLA paradigm. This year, more companies including NVIDIA have iterated and optimized on world models and video generation models, producing better results.
So the progress you're describing from GR2 to Dream Zero is about learning from video to generate actions, to generate robot trajectories.
Exactly. The core idea is using video generation rather than text generation. The way I understand VLA, its backbone is still a language model. It evolved from a multimodal vision language model by adding action outputs, so it went from VLM to VLA. But world models are built on video generation models, which corresponds to another paradigm for understanding the world, the video paradigm. So that's why I see this as another significant development in Q1. Number 4 is a personal preference. I think it's Galbot's tennis-playing robot demo released after Chinese New Year. For the first time, people saw a humanoid robot achieving solid performance on a high-speed, real-time feedback task. It might be far from commercialization today, but it opened up our imagination about what's possible for humanoid robot deployment. It showed that with current hardware and compute, real-time tasks like this are achievable. Finally, number 5, also from this year's CES, is Boston Dynamics' announcement of the all-new production-ready electric Atlas. Boston Dynamics is essentially the godfather of humanoid robotics. They've done incredibly deep, long-term research on difficult scenarios and practical value. This new electric Atlas reflects some very innovative thinking about how humanoid robots should enter industrial scenarios and achieve real deployment. It opens up a new direction for the industry. At the same time, I think they're probably the fastest to mass production and deployment in the US, or even the entire Western ecosystem, which reflects their future approach to research and commercialization.
Before this mass-produced electric version, it was hydraulic, right? But I remember they announced the shift to electric a long time ago.
Boston Dynamics stuck with hydraulic for a very long time. The earliest Atlas videos with those stunning moves were all hydraulic, but they released an electric Atlas about 2 years ago.
So this is a new version?
A completely new version. We can get into the details later. The design is very distinctive. It uses a highly modular motor approach. There are essentially only two types of actuators. The body can rotate 360 degrees at high speed, and it can quickly swap left and right leg configurations. These are all very innovative features.
The developments you just mentioned happen to cover the key elements or modules we use to observe embodied AI today: hardware platform, critical components like Dexterous hands, the brain, the cerebellum, and finally the integration of the whole software-hardware system. We can go through them one by one. Among the things you mentioned, the Unitree Gala performance, the tennis demo with Tsinghua by Galbot, and Boston's Atlas, they all relate to humanoid robots. Let's start with Unitree. I think this is the most familiar and closely watched company, and it's been in the news recently. Their IPO prospectus has been disclosed, so we can see some financials. Actually, Unitree was also on the gala last year, and both times went viral with the general public. I have an interesting observation. After last year's performance, when I talked to industry people, many robot builders were pretty dismissive. They didn't think it was that impressive. Including that handkerchief spinning move. It wasn't actually the hand spinning it. There was a mechanical device attached to the handkerchief, so if you threw it, it would definitely come back. But after this year's performance, talking to founders recently, there's much more recognition from within the industry. Can you explain what the real technical sophistication is? Where's the progress?
First, robot locomotion control has evolved very rapidly in 2025. All the techniques and control methods Unitree used in this gala, the underlying papers, were basically published in mid to late 2025. Unitree just happened to showcase all of this on the gala stage, giving everyone a stunning demonstration. The core breakthrough is better motion capture and imitation learning capabilities. We can quickly translate human movements to humanoid robots, and we have better reinforcement learning training tools that can turn mocap data into more stable policies in simulation before deploying on the robot.
So the movements look more human-like.
Right, they're all captured from humans first, either through motion capture or teleoperation, then iterated through reinforcement learning in the simulator to make the movements more stable and robust, before being transferred to the Unitree G1 hardware platform.
Yeah, traditional martial arts moves have specific forms, including those subtle footwork patterns. I thought those were pretty intricate.
Exactly. This fundamentally reflects the G1's strong absolute performance and consistency in basic locomotion capabilities. The key thing about this year's gala was consistency. There were over 20 humanoid robots on stage doing complex moves simultaneously, including explosive jumps and full backflips, with very high consistency. This isn't just about tuning one machine carefully. You need to ensure consistent performance across 20+ production-grade units, each facing different environmental disturbances. So this demands very high hardware quality control and stability in locomotion algorithms. I think this might be Unitree's biggest advantage compared to all other companies right now.
Years ago, Boston Dynamics demos showed robots doing moves that looked very human-like. What's the difference between what Unitree demonstrated now and those Boston Dynamics parkour and backflip videos from back then?
Back then, Boston Dynamics basically used traditional control algorithms, MPC and similar methods. They had a group of very experienced veterans tuning classical locomotion algorithms. But today's underlying control policies are all trained through reinforcement learning, simulation, and end-to-end methods. Fundamentally different in principle, our adaptability to environmental disturbances is much stronger than Boston Dynamics back then. Also, those Boston Dynamics parkour videos were heavily edited. They showed plenty of failed attempts.
And come to think of it, they never showed videos of dozens of Boston Dynamics robots completing the same move together.
Actually, with the hydraulic error technology, even getting a single machine to complete a long sequence of parkour moves wasn't very reliable. The robots fail often. So Unitree's demonstration, over 20 machines doing highly synchronized moves in real time, that's orders of magnitude harder and more demanding in terms of reliability. Also, over the past year, a lot of parkour and dance moves have started incorporating visual feedback and localization capabilities. Including this time, each robot on stage had a LiDAR on its head, so they probably had preliminary mapping and localization abilities.
You mentioned the progress. On the other hand, what are the exaggerated expectations that the public performance might have created? Things the general public might think robots can already do, but they actually can't.
I think it's pretty obvious. All the dance and performance moves today are essentially pre-programmed fixed sequences. If these robots encounter significant disturbances, they have very limited autonomous decision-making capability. Also, these performances were all whole body or lower limb movements, no upper limb manipulation at all. Yet most embodied AI research today actually centers on manipulation, on contact and understanding of complex tasks. Unitree hasn't done much work in this area yet.
Perfect time to expand on Unitree's situation since they just disclosed their prospectus. We can see some financials including revenue breakdown by product. What stands out to you?
Their humanoid business is growing fast. They released their first humanoid H1 in 2023, then G1 in 2024. 2024 was still early days for G1 sales. Last year was basically all G1 for humanoids, and the humanoid share is increasing rapidly, showing this company will be humanoid-centric going forward. Quadruped robots will likely be a smaller share long-term.
Right, humanoids are growing fast. In 2023, humanoids were less than 2% of Unitree's revenue. By 2024, it was 27%. By the first 3 quarters of 2025, it had already surpassed 50%, reaching 51%.
I've always felt many robotics companies are supply-driven. The entire market, whether experts or enthusiasts, has huge expectations and imagination for robots. Often it's really limited by supply. You don't have a product out, it's not stable, it can't be mass-produced, so you have no revenue. Once you have good supply, good products, sales come naturally, whether for research, performances, or industrial markets. Unitree reflects this pattern.
I think that's true early on. At least for now, demand in the research market is very strong.
Humanoid robots are genuinely in the early days today, no matter how much hype and speculation there is.
Another thing that struck me from the prospectus is their high gross margin, over 60% for humanoids, around 63% in the latest 2025 data. That's very high for a software-hardware integrated product, right?
Mainly because humanoids aren't a real commercial scenario today. As we said, they're mostly sold to the research market. In the research market, 60% gross margin might actually be low. It's a small market with fragmented orders. Traditionally, many research equipment markets have 70 to 80% margins. For Unitree, part of today's pricing is due to lack of competition. Part is that the research market isn't very price sensitive. It's probably only around a 1 billion RMB market today.
That reminds me of LiDAR in the early days. Also very high margins when it was mainly sold to L4 companies as R&D equipment.
If you sell cheaper, like Sharpa's Dexterous hand at $50,000 a piece, you won't get 2-3x volume growth from a price cut. Today isn't an elastic pricing market. Customer numbers are fixed, demand is fixed. In this context, pricing is determined by relative competitiveness. The bigger question might be, G1 has been out for 20 months. Why hasn't any company truly challenged its position?
So why do you think that is? G1 was the smaller humanoid they launched at 99,000 RMB and up, around 1.2 to 1.3 meters tall.
Several reasons. First, G1 is a very well-defined product success, positioned for the research and education market. Unitree's first humanoid was H1. If you look at its configuration, you can imagine a big quadruped dog standing up.
Wang Xingxing himself said that. We interviewed him in 2023 and asked how they developed their humanoid, how H1 came about. He said it took just 3.5 people, 3 engineers plus half of himself. He said they just made a dog stand up. He didn't think it was that hard.
Because at that time, he didn't believe in humanoid robots, or rather he didn't want to do humanoid robots. Back in 2021 or 2022, he publicly expressed not wanting to do humanoids. But as the research market matured and demand emerged for humanoids, in that context, making a mature quadruped stand up was a very quick and simple solution.
Then what changed with G1?
G1 was Unitree's first humanoid, designed specifically for the research market. The most typical feature was the height drop, from around 1.8 meters on H1 to around 1.3 meters on G1. Don't underestimate this height reduction. More importantly, with the height reduction came massive weight reduction, which greatly helps with motor power density, locomotion performance, and battery life. And why could they reduce height? Because if the target is the research market, from a humanoid research perspective, a 1.3 meter small humanoid can do essentially the same research as a 1.8 meter full-size humanoid. This product was purpose-built for this scenario, which is why Unitree's positioning was so precise that it's hard for other companies to follow.
So they satisfied this market so well from the start that other companies feel there's no differentiation if they try to compete.
Back to a macro question. Investors have never liked Unitree targeting the research market.
Alan Zhu publicly expressed this view. He didn't think it was a sustainable market.
It depends on how you understand Wang Xingxing and Unitree as a company. I met him in 2019 at their Hangzhou office. He was debugging a very early robot dog. probably LateTalk or AlienGo, very early stage. Back then, the company sold maybe a dozen or two robot dogs a year, around 10 million RMB revenue, profitable, probably fewer than 10 or around 10 people. Why was Unitree profitable? Because it had to be. If not profitable, I wouldn't have met them in 2019.
Because it was never a company that investors loved.
Right, this is the journey many hardware companies went through. You have to sell something people are willing to pay for. Wang Xinxin loved quadruped robots, so he chose to keep iterating products and selling to whoever wanted to buy, institutes and universities at the time. But this market was never very big. There are only so many universities and research institutes globally. Each might buy a few robots. Total addressable market is limited. So if you tell investors your main market is only around 1 billion RMB, and you don't know when humanoids or legged robots can quickly move into industrial or commercial applications, it's hard for investors to fund you. That's why even though Unitree defined a great G1 for the research market, if I were an investor in another humanoid company and heard my company wanted to enter the research market to compete with Unitree, I'd think it was a terrible strategic direction.
So this partly explains why G1 still has no competitors after 20 months.
Of course, some companies are making small humanoids, but in terms of product consistency and stability, there's still a huge gap. One thing we must understand, for hardware companies, hardware design, supply chain refinement, and component stability require long-term validation and testing. Today, it's easy to make one or two prototypes that match or exceed G1, but achieving reliable production at thousands or tens of thousands of units requires going through the process Unitree went through. Before producing G1, Unitree had already sold tens of thousands of quadruped robots. Each has at least 12 motors. Unitree has truly completed the design, production, and mass manufacturing of millions of motors. This hardware and supply chain barrier is a hurdle all new entrants to humanoids must cross.
And with hardware, the time cost to cross that hurdle is very hard to compress.
Exactly. That's why you see large model companies might have a 3-6 month lead, but hardware companies might have 12 or even 24 months advantages. I think Unitree's success parallels DJI's, a founder who genuinely loves and believes in the direction, not someone who chased a huge commercial opportunity. I chatted with a veteran recently who met Wang Xinxin fundraising in 2017. He asked him, what can this actually do? Wang Xinxin couldn't say, nor should he have been able to.
My Unitree was founded quite early. He started the company in 2016, started working on it during grad school, which was even earlier. What do you think Unitree's next growth phase depends on? Because as you said, whether it's Unitree's own expectations or external expectations, they'll need to enter larger markets eventually. And they probably won't stop at just doing hardware platform, and locomotion. Well, people clearly see the bigger opportunity is in robot intelligence, the combination of brain and cerebellum.
One thing Unitree does well is that Wang Xinxin is a very focused and obsessive founder. Throughout the company's history, his dedication to building a good hardware platform hasn't changed. That's why for a long time, including looking at Unitree's financials today, they haven't spent much effort or capital on AI or model-related work in recent years.
Right, I can share a number. Their R&D spend for the first 3 quarters of 2025 was around 90 million RMB.
That's probably much lower than many robotics companies. Wang Xinxin's operational caution is in the DNA. If he weren't that kind of founder, he wouldn't have survived to this day.
Wouldn't have survived until the embodied AI boom.
Right? But look at the prospectus. They're raising 4 billion RMB with 2 billion planned for brain research. They're also actively open sourcing, recently releasing a VLA work and a world model work. In terms of research frontier, they're following the market mainstream, but I have high expectations for their long-term achievements.
What do you think might go wrong if they don't achieve breakthroughs there? For example, my observation is that in many of these new embodied AI companies, AI people still have significant influence. At least among co-founders, there's often someone with an AI background. But Unitree's current core management doesn't seem to have anyone with particularly strong AI or deep learning credentials.
Unitree is still very much Wang Xinxin-centric. He doesn't have a partner who can independently lead AI or algorithms. This relates to company DNA and his way of thinking.
Actually, the question in my mind is, do you necessarily need such a person to do the brain part well? Or maybe not necessarily.
My own take is that Unitree will pursue a following strategy on the brain or intelligence direction for the long term.
You think that's enough for their competitiveness?
I think it's enough.
Why?
The value of AI models can't be separated from the hardware platform. For Unitree, the more critical thing might be truly occupying the de facto standard position for humanoid robots in the global research market, having all the latest humanoid research based on their hardware, whether open source or closed source. As long as this continues, their ecosystem position is hard to replace. Even if better companies launch excellent closed-source embodied models, Unitree benefits indirectly. Meanwhile, Unitree itself and more players in the industry will continuously launch high-performance open-source models on Unitree hardware. The coupling and binding between these models and Unitree hardware will be a sustained advantage for years to come.
Unitree previously announced they shipped over 5,500 humanoid units in 2025 and said they expect to ship 10,000 to 20,000 in 2026, roughly 2-3x growth. Do you think they can do it?
I think they should be able to. These projections look very linear.
You mean they might do even more?
Right, depending on market explosion. Recently, there's a company focused on humanoid robot leasing, Quntianzu.
Yeah, I saw that news.
The signal it sends me is that with the Gala going viral and G1's performance capabilities maturing, there will be very broad and sustained demand for performances and leasing over the next year or two. Looking at this market, 10,000, 20,000 units a year is absolutely no problem. It could be much larger, limited only by how much capacity Unitree wants to put into this product.
Next, let's talk about another development you mentioned, Galbot's tennis-playing robot. I'm a bit surprised you included it because I thought robots have been able to play ping pong and tennis for a long time. There are even startups specifically building tennis training robots, though they don't use humanoids. What technical trends do you see in Galbot using a humanoid to play tennis?
Because we've looked at many tennis robot projects before, so we understand the technical complexity of a real-time tennis robot.
You mean you've seen startups in this space?
Right, we've seen many. A wheeled robot, specifically for tennis ball speeds can reach 100 kilometers per h. On such a small court, you have very little time for trajectory prediction and real-time response. Real-time ball sports are a huge challenge for any robot form factor, even for wheeled robots. For a more complex humanoid, achieving ball trajectory recognition, judgment, and completing the full swing motion with the entire tech stack as of early 2026 is still a very complex engineering feat.
It's a bipedal, fully humanoid robot doing this.
And it really achieved closed-loop real-time perception, decision-making, and whole body control.
This is indeed different from dancing or martial arts because every ball coming at you requires different judgments. You can't pre-program a routine and just play.
Exactly. So academically, the achievement is decent because I roughly know how they did it. They rented a pretty large tennis court during the holiday, had lots of mocap equipment, collected lots of data, and did repeated RL training on the model. From a technical breakthrough perspective, it's okay, a complex systems engineering project demonstrating execution capability. But the bigger insight for me is that we previously couldn't imagine humanoid robots could accomplish such tasks. When this demo came out, I remember Andrei Karpathy replied on X saying there's no way this is real, it must be AI generated.
He thought it was CG?
Right, that's what he said. I had the same reaction when I first saw it. So for me, this carefully crafted demo expanded our imagination of humanoid robot capabilities.
Meaning with existing technology today, through combination and some engineering optimization, how far can you push things?
To draw an analogy, Gattle's tennis demo is like a great demo. Actually, in January and March, Figure also released very impressive whole body locomotion demos. Very smooth natural movements, but you can clearly tell the whole video was carefully choreographed, filmed, and edited. It's not CG, it's genuinely autonomous execution by the real robot, but you can tell they did a lot of specialized training to achieve this effect. At least for the mass market, it opens up understanding and imagination of humanoid robots. I think these are meaningful milestones for Q1.
Since these are very specific scenarios, can they transfer to other tasks? What application value comes next?
The tennis scenario specifically is a bit tricky, because it probably wasn't using onboard compute and vision for ball trajectory processing. There were actually external cameras on the court for higher frame rates, not edge compute.
Not edge compute.
Right? But computer science has taught us repeatedly, once something can be done, humans will definitely find ways to optimize it to run on smaller compute with fewer resources. So for us, whether it can be done is the key question. How to optimize is step 2.
To summarize, including companies like Unitree and Galbot that do full humanoid robots, bipedal humanoid companies, and also Agibot, Magic Lab, how do you think Chinese companies performed in Q1?
Overall, beyond expectations, the entire industry is accelerating. Agibot released a new whole-body locomotion work around the end of last year or beginning of this year. NVIDIA also released Sonic, a new whole-body locomotion framework. Overall, in 2024 and 2025, locomotion and manipulation were still two very separate systems. But starting this year, as humanoid hardware matures and data increases, we're beginning to have the possibility of using a unified model for whole-body locomotion and manipulation. This is just emerging now, but over the next 12 months, the acceleration and compounding effects will keep building. so I can hardly imagine what kind of humanoid robot performance we'll see at the 2027 gala.
Something to look forward to. That summary is good. Previously, manipulation and locomotion were separate, and now they're being combined under one model controlling the whole body.
Right? Several companies are doing the same work, including Figure, Alibaba, Nvidia. Everyone's pushing in this direction. For the industry, once this paradigm is established, more people will iterate and improve on it.
There's an old question. Many people think bipedal locomotion isn't that valuable, not a high priority.
I thought that way for a long time too.
When did you change your mind?
I think this quarter, the shock was pretty significant.
Can you explain why? What specifically changed?
The entire robotics industry is a supply-constrained industry. When a robot truly achieves certain capabilities, truly delivers certain capabilities stably, the value it can create gets released quickly. For a long time, I also felt the complexity and difficulty humanoid robots bring compared to their benefits was pretty limited. Essentially, I was magnifying the difficulties of humanoid robots. For example, we'd say in warehouse scenarios, factory scenarios, we just need 2 arms, not 2 legs. Wheels can solve mobility in factory environments. I watched several Boston Dynamics interviews recently, and there were a few passages that really struck me. Many cliché arguments say the whole world is designed for humans, so humanoid robots must be the most general, most efficient form factor because one form can adapt to many environments. But for environments where the ground is already relatively flat and structured, it seems wheeled robots can achieve similar passability. Why do we really need 2 legs? But here's an interesting phenomenon. Today, when a humanoid robot moves in a structured environment, assuming locomotion problems are fully solved, it only needs about 40 by 60 centimeters of space to move stably. And because its legs and body have so many degrees of freedom, it can reach down and stretch up across a huge range. If we want to move a 10 kilograms or 20 kilograms box like a humanoid robot, many full-size humanoid robots can basically already do this, from ground level up to around 2 meters. Boston Dynamics' new form factor can reach up to 2.3 meters. But if we want to do the same thing with a wheeled robot, the complexity is actually no lower than humanoid.
How big are wheel platforms generally? How much area do they need?
Definitely bigger than 40 by 60 centimeters.
Because the 40 by 60 you mentioned is roughly 2 MacBooks side by side.
About right, it's the minimum footprint for a standing human. In narrow spaces or aisles, you actually need very little area to pass through. But you know the biggest problem with wheeled robots? Center of gravity. Let me give you an example. Besides Atlas, Boston Dynamics has a project called Stretch, a composite robot with a huge AGV base plus a giant single-arm manipulator. This structure can take down 15 to 20 kilograms boxes from containers or shelves, but to lift one box, the entire stretch weighs about a ton.
Because when it reaches high, the base has to be heavy or it'll tip over.
Right? But think about human structure. We can dynamically adjust center of gravity and posture to achieve the same box lifting goal. Today, a full-size humanoid robot, even a heavier one, is only 70 to 80 kilograms compared to an 800 kilograms or 1-ton stretch. That's a 10x weight difference.
That's pretty interesting. The more we talk, the more amazing biology seems.
Let me share one more recent insight. If we want to build a wheeled robot with very good spatial mobility, the ideal solution is actually 4-wheel steering.
4-wheel steering?
Right. Probably not even 2 differential wheels, but 4-wheel steering for maximum freedom. 4-wheel steering with all active motors would need 8 motors. If you also want to adapt to different heights like a humanoid, you'd need several more motors for some lifting mechanism.
So your points are, first, for equivalent performance, wheeled isn't necessarily simpler than humanoid.
And not necessarily cheaper. If you need the same or more motors plus higher mass, the base is heavier, so all costs go up. You need higher power motors, higher power batteries. Everything adds cost quickly.
So complexity and cost aren't necessarily lower than humanoid. On the other hand, if humanoid form factor can be technically realized well, it might open up many scenarios we hadn't thought of before. Things that become possible because supply is now available.
And I think the new Atlas gives us many signals. A humanoid robot doesn't necessarily have to be fully human-like. It can be superhuman, can surpass certain human structures, because the human body evolved this way through very contingent natural selection.
Perfect segue to expand on that, since the 5th development you mentioned was also the new electric Atlas. What aspects are human-like, and where does it transcend humans?
A few things stand out about the new Atlas. First, it uses a very modular design. It's a bit like the difference between collaborative arms and industrial robotic arms. Traditional industrial arms have custom-designed motors and reducers at each joint, a very complex serial structure. But collaborative arms simplify the arm motors to very few standardized motor types. Atlas applies similar logic. Not many complex motor structures or selections. The whole robot uses simple rotary motors, achieving versatility through motor performance redundancy on the arms, thighs, calves, everywhere. The benefit is that from a production and assembly perspective, difficulty is much lower. Plus, it's not limited by human physical constraints. The head and torso can both do 360-degree full rotation, Terminator style.
Right, the head can spin all the way around.
But the benefits are significant. If a person needs to turn from facing north to facing south, they might need 3 or 4 steps, coordinating legs and body through multiple movements. For Atlas, waist motor spins 360 degrees and it's done.
So its left and right legs don't really matter after spinning.
It doesn't even distinguish left and right legs. The left and right are interchangeable, same with left and right arms. So it has a highly modular structure. Not only is it more adaptable in scenarios, production and assembly difficulty is reduced, and the field repair costs are lower when things break. And I specifically mentioned Boston Dynamics because this is very relevant to US manufacturing and industry today. America is desperately short of skilled technical workers.
So they designed it to be as simple and easy to assemble as possible.
Right? Solving installation and repair problems through performance redundancy and structural simplification.
Perfect time to move to the next topic. Everything we discussed earlier was Chinese companies, and you also talked about new insights on the necessity of humanoid form factor. You just went to the US and talked to many American practitioners. Can you tell us about the progress of hot US humanoid companies? First, which companies do you think the industry is paying most attention to in the US?
Definitely Tesla Optimus gets the most attention, and Figure AI, which raised the most funding and currently has the highest valuation. Traditional players include Boston Dynamics, plus some longer-tail companies like 1X in Norway and Aptronics Apollo Robot in Texas. These are all currently active humanoid robot companies in the US market. But the most market attention goes to Optimus and Figure.
What about the companies people often mention, Pai, Sunday, Generalist? They're not full humanoid companies?
They're still model-centric companies.
Intelligence-centric companies.
Right. I think Sunday is a model and data-focused, hardware-light company.
Okay, let's start with Optimus. I think it also sparked the new wave in the US and inspired a batch of Chinese startups. Elon recently said in an interview that Optimus Gen 3 has been design frozen, but from our understanding of the China supply chain, it was supposed to debut in April, then got delayed at least until late June, with mass production possibly delayed too. Originally planned for October this year, now maybe pushed to next year.
Right, I'd heard the earliest plan was March or Q1 for the release. Seems like the schedule keeps slipping. It's kind of expected. There's a saying in this industry, Elon is always right, but his timing is always wrong. Might need to add considerable buffer. For Gen 3, the information I have is that challenges are significant on both hardware and software. Specifically on hardware, they're facing big challenges with the hands because they're doing a very ambitious, high DOF tendon-driven solution. I think this approach faces massive challenges in mass production and reliability. On the other hand, Elon has set very high expectations for this year's production volume or shipments for Optimus Gen 3, at least around 10,000 units.
You mean 10,000 units?
At least 10,000.
Feels like that's already scaled back from what he said before.
Already scaled back. If I remember correctly, in 2025, they were saying 10,000 units, and by 2026, they were talking 100,000 or a million. But considering it's already April, even 10,000 is very challenging.
You mentioned that the hand is a high DOF tendon-driven solution. We'd actually talked to some supply chain people before. Tesla was also looking at motor solutions, or they made similar requests to some suppliers.
The motors you're talking about are probably direct drive dominant solutions. Tendon-driven also has motors. They're just placed
in the forearm.
Right, current tendon-driven solutions put most motors in the forearm position, not in the palm. But a direct drive solution like Sharpa's puts motors directly at each finger joint. These are two completely different design philosophies. Elon chose tendon-driven because he believes it's more biomimetic and lower cost.
Because humans are built that way, tendons in the hand.
Right, muscles, tendons, humans work this way. So to achieve very human-like dexterity, Elon believes tendon-driven is necessary. But tendon-driven brings many problems, which is why over the past year or so, I've gradually heard quite a bit of feedback that this route still faces massive challenges. Assembling a high DOF dexterous hand means inserting maybe 40 plus different tendon cables in the wrist and palm space, then solving consistency creep reliability issues. When any tendon loosens, needs replacement, or breaks, reassembly and repair are also huge challenges.
Sounds a bit like hand surgery after an injury.
Right, so when I discussed this with friends, one gave me an interesting counter question. We all say Elon chose tendon-driven because he thinks it's more biomimetic. But my friend asked, if you're already using motors, you're not muscles. Where's the first principles analogy? Because human muscle and tissue can regenerate. If there's damage or strain, it can heal itself through recovery and training. But for tendons, motors, or gears, wear is irreversible. Meanwhile, muscles have very high energy density and torque density, but motors have huge gaps versus muscles in both volume and energy density. So you're using something that's not muscle to mimic muscle performance, then expecting the same performance. That itself violates first principles.
If engineers have these thoughts, can they give feedback to Elon internally at Optimus?
I think on this matter, just like when Elon chose pure vision and end-to-end for autonomous driving, he's very strong-willed and stubborn. As an industry observer, this is a very conflicted position. Elon has historically been proven right on many long-term technical direction choices and judgments against basically the entire market. Inside Autopilot, back in 2016 to 2017 when they started, nobody believed in Elon's vision for pure vision or end-to-end either. It was only through gradual engineering and technical efforts over the past few years that the vision was realized. So will Dexterous hands face the same thing? I can't say today, but I do see massive challenges and problems for tendon-driven Dexterous hands potentially producing 10,000 units in 2026.
Right, I think this is something to watch going forward, whether Optimus Dexterous hands technical composition changes, whether they pivot to another approach from their current solution. Then another company you mentioned, Figure, most funded, highest valuation. I've talked to many Chinese embodied AI entrepreneurs, and their attitude toward Figure is complex. On one hand, they think Figure releases some decent results from time to time. On the other hand, they think the company's style is very hype-driven.
This company is indeed very hype-driven. They deserve an Oscar for visual effects. I think it might relate to Brett's experience as an entrepreneur.
The founder.
Right, he's a founder who's very good at communicating vision and stories to investors.
What did he do before Figure?
Before Figure, he founded another company called Archer, an eVTOL company, electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft.
eVTOL.
If I remember correctly, that company went public in 2021, and shortly after he left and founded Figure. Before that, he'd also sold his first startup. So Brett's pattern is constantly finding the next hot startup topic, attracting investors who believe in his vision and capabilities, and historically quickly selling or taking the company public. That's the impression he's consistently left on the market.
So he's a visionary founder with a track record of successful exits.
Right, but you could also say much of what he does is aimed at quickly selling or taking the company public. In fact, he exited Archer, and eVTOL is still in very early stages for the industry. I heard they founded another new company last year or this year, also put a lot of funding into it, a smart hardware company. I think this background is part of the criticism of Brett as a founder, whether he really has enough focus and resilience.
Why didn't people criticize Elon this way before?
Because Elon actually made things happen, or rather, before Elon made Tesla and SpaceX work, people probably couldn't distinguish him from a fraud either.
Right, should say early Elon probably also faced lots of skepticism. It's just that as he gradually made things happen, those voices faded.
Right, so is Brett that kind of founder? I think there's lots of market debate today, but looking at results, when Brett founded Figure in 2023, it was born amid heavy skepticism. He didn't really understand the robotics industry himself. Many early members, including robotics and hardware talent, attracted from Boston Dynamics and elsewhere, left after a year or two. But undeniably, the whole industry is moving very fast. My feeling is that over the past year or two, Figure has attracted many excellent hardware and software talents and has indeed delivered solid results. We've seen several new humanoid robots they've released, including whole body locomotion effects they've shown, demonstrating they have real substance in this field.
Because they actually do both hardware and models. How's their model work evaluated in the industry?
They announced Helix AI relatively early in the industry, a 2-layer and 3-layer architecture implementing the algorithmic framework for whole body locomotion, from low frequency to medium frequency to high frequency. From the demonstrated effects and what I've heard from internal colleagues, their capabilities are still quite leading in the market. Of course, this might also be because besides Optimus, there aren't many US companies truly working on full-size humanoid hardware and models, so they represent the highest level of the US market.
They've raised a lot of funding in the space, and the US seems to have capital willing to support this direction. Why are there so few such companies in the US, compared to China where we have many embodied AI companies, with new ones still emerging in late 2025?
This is closely tied to the decline of US manufacturing, the decline of robotics supply chains or hardware supply chains.
It can't support that many startups.
Right, which is also why people joke that in China you might build a humanoid robot for a few million RMB, but it's hard to imagine doing that in the US. Actually, the reason Figure needs to raise so much money might also reflect US manufacturing strategy or national will, hoping to drive US manufacturing reshoring or revival by supporting some leading enterprises, because massive supplier and component industries no longer exist in the US. For Figure, if they want to fully domestically produce humanoid robots, they need massive upfront investment. This is also the mainstream trend or strategic choice we see in US society currently.
Another company I think the US government might support is Boston Dynamics, and honestly, they've been supported for a long time. Founded in 1992, over 30 years, never really scaled commercially or made much money, but has always existed, acquired, and sold by several companies. We talked about Boston Dynamics' progress on the new electric Atlas hardware earlier. They also had Q1 progress on the model and intelligence side. They found a partner, Google. Can you elaborate on what recent changes they've had?
This isn't surprising. We knew that a year or two ago, DeepMind was initially partnering with Apptronik in Texas. Their product was a full-size humanoid robot called Apollo. But from what I heard, that partnership was a complete failure. Essentially, Apollo's hardware reliability, precision, and consistency had massive challenges. Google researchers were spending huge amounts of time just getting the machine to work, rather than doing actual productive research. I think Google's choice to partner with Boston Dynamics is very wise.
Why doesn't Google build full humanoid robots themselves? You were at Google doing hardware-related work before, Google Glass and such.
I think Google, including Meta, these internet companies have absolutely no DNA or capability for hardware. Building hardware is a very complex systems engineering project and requires coordination across the entire supply chain.
Does this depend on different types of hardware? Meta's glasses seem to be doing okay. Is it related to hardware complexity?
I don't think Meta's glasses are doing very well. Meta's glasses are under massive losses and subsidies.
So they're just selling well.
The reality is Reality Labs has probably lost hundreds of billions of dollars cumulatively. Over the past decade, from Oculus acquisition to Reality Labs being downgraded, Meta has lost hundreds of billions of dollars over these 10 years. Meta Quest does sell well, $399, $299, but a normal Ray-Ban sunglasses should cost that much. Ray-Ban has 90% plus gross margins. For Meta smart glasses, they're basically selling at cost or even subsidized. You can imagine how much Meta has to pay Ray-Ban per pair. I think glasses are a pretty failed business for Meta, maybe getting off track.
For this Google and Boston Dynamics partnership, how will they solve manufacturing? They probably don't want Chinese companies deeply involved.
Boston Dynamics' main shareholder now is Hyundai Motor. They actually have quite a bit of help and resources from Hyundai as an automaker on manufacturing and supply chain. Much of their production assembly and early testing is done at Hyundai's factories, so-called US allies.
Speaking of which, the US has one approach. It's getting manufacturing-capable allies like Japan and South Korea to invest in the US. Can they use this to compensate for gaps in robotics and complex hardware platform manufacturing?
I think it's a pass, but it means that like the EV blockade, doing the same thing in the US might cost 2-3x, a cost that US society may have to bear long term. Is that something customers or consumers are willing to accept?
The companies we just discussed are all more manufacturing related, involved in hardware platform, including Optimus, Figure, Boston Dynamics, etc. In the US, there are also embodied AI companies like Pi we mentioned earlier, more focused on models. Many Chinese practitioners see them as benchmarks. Pi 0.6 quote S latest model, Sunday and Generalist's data collection solutions. What new progress at these companies is worth watching in Q1?
Besides Pi 0.6 released last year, they've continued releasing influential and creative work in Q1. For example, they published approaches to solving long sequence memory problems, somewhat like OpenAI's approach, using text to record current state long-term and continuously reflecting on that state to enhance manipulation consistency and stability. They also have new frameworks for real robot RL and online RL on the action side in complex scenarios. Overall, Pi's releases still represent the frontier of the market on cross-embodiment and dynamic environment adaptation. In this regard, Pi is still the most leading globally.
The first point you mentioned, adding long-term memory OpenAI style at the system level, external to the model. Many Chinese practitioners have noticed this, so now there's an expression in the industry. The embodied model is essentially a physical world agent. Virtual world agents today aren't just models anymore. They have orchestration layers, skills, tools, memory. The embodied AI industry is also discussing this. Beyond the embodied foundation model, how should your entire system be organized to accomplish tasks in complex environments?
Right. Actually, back to your question about model architecture. Sharpa had a presentation at GTC proposing a 3-layer architecture logic. Several companies today are proposing multi-layer architectures, including the Helix I mentioned, Figure's 3-layer architecture. Sharpa's 3 layers are System 2, System 1, and System 0. System 2 is low-frequency but high-dimensional language-level planning.
Low frequency meaning it runs slower?
Right.
Slow system, fast system, somewhat like that concept.
Fast and slow systems. Previously, System 2 and System 1 were a dual system. Sharpa introduced a third system called System 0.
Can you finish describing the top layer first? It's more macro planning.
Right, System 2 is more macro planning, input primarily text-based. Below that is System 1. It receives video or image information it sees, plus the robot's current state and text description of the task, like I need to go somewhere and do something. What does System 1 output? System 1 outputs specific arm or joint movements, but coarse movements, like today's VLA might output rough arm joint trajectory information and gripper open or close signals. In Sharpa's architecture, there's a new System 0. Its input is tactile information, plus the coarse movement trajectory passed down from System 1. When you have a coarse trajectory and tactile input, you can achieve closed-loop control of many specific actions.
Before it actually touches something, where does the tactile information come from? From prediction about the object?
No, it's about what to do after you touch it. That's what this model solves.
So at System 1, it might already be touching the thing?
Right, but the position isn't very accurate, or that contact isn't enough to reliably pick it up. That's when System 0 kicks in. System 0's purpose is, based on my existing contact information and task intent, what should each finger, each joint specifically do? This is the lowest level, highest frequency model that needs to solve this.
Because for humans, seeing a cup like this porcelain cup, this aluminum you can basically judge material, friction, and weight.
Right, but without touch, you don't know what to do. Using human physiology as analogy, it's brain, brainstem, and peripheral nerve reflexes. You have many reflexes, pulling back from something hot, different peripheral nerve reactions to rough or soft things. This architecture is actually simulating humans' layered system.
Actually, what I was thinking is, with this architecture, through real-world use or RL rollout data, could the model learn to anticipate fine manipulation the way an experienced person does? Because if you've handled enough objects in your life, you can look at something and already know how to grip and manipulate it without actually touching it first.
This probably involves world models' hallucination and prediction capabilities. This is indeed a direction brain itself should produce when generating movement trajectories or control trajectories. But what lets you actually pick it up accurately is still having touch in your hands.
Right, there were experiments before, blocking finger nerve endings, some seemingly simple tasks become impossible.
Yes. In other words, if you cover your eyes, you can also complete many tasks. So touch is very important for ultimate task completion. Today's VLA and world model training methods basically have zero tactile signals.
So Sharpa, you think this is very good progress?
It shows that when touch is introduced into a high DOF end effector like Sharpa's Dexterous hand product, how we can complete tasks that were previously hard to imagine.
On this trip to the US, which companies, institutions, and schools did you hear are using Sharpa's hand for research? What new results have they seen with new tactile information?
This feeling has been very strong since mid last year, including late last year. If you look at embodied AI or robotics frontier research, we go back, probably looking at quadruped locomotion research. A year or two ago, we were broadly studying VLA and two-finger grippers or Yumi-like structures for dexterous manipulation. Over the past year, humanoid locomotion problems have been preliminarily solved. So if you're a researcher studying embodied AI frontier today, what should you study? What's the next worthwhile research direction? Since last year, basically all researchers I've talked to have reached consensus around dexterous hands.
What about world models?
World models too, but world models are probably a direction dominated by big tech.
NVIDIA has had many releases recently.
The backbone of world models is video generation models. Today, the companies still at the table doing video generation models are all absolute big tech. The challenge of video generation models themselves is that compute and resource consumption scale exponentially, much larger than language models. That's why you see Sora. OpenAI just announced a few days ago they're stopping Sora product work. Taking Google as an example, daily R&D investment and compute investment in video generation models is massive, at a scale hard to imagine for any startup.
Even OpenAI? They have so much money. Is it because they want to sharpen their focus and go head-to-head with Anthropic?
I think today agent and coding is a very clear demand, and OpenAI is also behind on this. But the bigger problem might be that video generation is indeed very resource intensive. Without clear downstream consumption and monetization scenarios, it's a huge ongoing investment for the company. So globally speaking, today the best video generation models might be ByteDance's Cdance, Google's Veo, Grok's Imagine, Kuaishou's Kling. These are probably the world's biggest internet companies.
Back to what you mentioned about researchers working on Dexterous hands. Which companies' hands are they mainly using now? This sounds like a business opportunity.
Right. Sharper's hand officially launched in May 2025 at ICRA in Atlanta. I happened to attend that conference and experienced the hand's performance firsthand for the first time. Truly stunning. But actually, over the past year, the hand overseas researchers used most was probably Roboterra's 12 DOF medium DOF hand. It's just that in the past 3 or 4 months, as Sharper's hand became available to overseas researchers, people started using Sharper too.
Roboterra's is 12 DOF, Sharper's is 22 DOF, same as human hands, 22 DOF not counting the wrist.
Right, to do complex manipulation, fewer DOFs can complete it, including NVIDIA's Ego Scale released early this year. It maps very well to Sharper's high DOF hand.
It's $50,000 a piece. Can US schools afford that?
Many are subsidized.
They want to become a foundational component of research.
Right, I think in the next 12 to 18 months, there will be intense competition in the market over who becomes the industry standard, the default choice for dexterous manipulation and dexterous hand research.
Like G1's position.
Right? Today, if you do humanoid research without using G1 robots, it's hard for others to reproduce your work if you publish a paper. If a dexterous hand emerges with similar product market fit, it will also become researchers' default choice globally. What does that mean? It means this hand must be reliable enough, have high enough DOF, complete various complex operations and research we expect, have relatively low cost, and have relatively complete sensors and development environment.
I think Sharper's ambitions go beyond this. Actually, today I chatted briefly with Li Yifang. He said what matters most is still AI capabilities.
I totally understand because their goal is to become a general-purpose robotics company, not a dexterous hand company. But I think there might be a hugely underestimated opportunity here. Dexterous hands could be a massive opportunity. There's a lesson here. Unitree's path to success. In 2020, because of MIT Mini Cheetah paper open sourcing, the entire market instantly had many companies building quadruped robots.
Can you explain what the Mini Cheetah open sourced?
Before Mini Cheetah open sourced, there were many companies and technical solutions for quadruped robots on the market. Hydraulic ones, more complex, higher cost motor solutions. Mini Cheetah's relatively typical work at the time introduced a quasi-direct drive QDD motor, a very classic structure, plus complete open source control algorithms, letting many very amateur teams in China quickly build quadruped robots. So it catalyzed rapid ecosystem prosperity. The market quickly had many startups. Xiaomi started doing CyberDog. Xpeng acquired a quadruped robotics company to form PX Robotics, and other internet entrepreneurs entered the quadruped robot market. I remember Xpeng's robotics company raised $100 million at a $500 million valuation in their first financing round in 2021. At the same time, Unitree was still an overlooked company. But why did Unitree go furthest, get to where it is today? Because Wang Xingxing is a very grounded, very focused person. He just wanted to build quadruped robots, just wanted to do quadruped robots well. Scientists needed cheap, usable hardware, and because of Wang Xingxing's groundedness and persistence, he didn't invest any money in AI or consumer mass production. Today for dexterous hands, I think there's a G1 position in the market, but you need to be very restrained and focused. Do such a product well to become the preferred solution for researchers worldwide who want to study and solve dexterous hand problems.
Right, because behind dexterous hands is dexterous manipulation, a crucial part of embodied AI.
A very important research direction. If as a dexterous hand company, you talk about commercialization too early for dexterous hands, without being open enough to collaborate and co-build with the entire research market, you might miss such an opportunity. For me, this is very much like Xpeng Robotics' attempt in 2021 to mass produce their robotic pony.
The robotic pony memories flooding back. I'd almost forgotten, but they did promote it at the time.
That story is very similar. Essentially, the failure of the robotic pony was because at that point, quadruped robots hadn't reached the commercialization stage. They were still in a stage needing lots of R&D and investment.
Speaking of Xpeng, we didn't mention them when discussing Chinese humanoid robot companies earlier, but they're also a company doing bipedal full humanoid robots.
Objectively speaking, Chinese automakers aren't weak in humanoids, but in terms of absolute innovation and breakthrough, automakers' strategy is still fast follow, and many still want to borrow from Tesla's playbook.
After going through companies on both sides, what's your overall take? How do US and China compare in embodied AI development?
What's your take?
My feeling is first, the industry has always said the US and China are at the same starting line in embodied AI, unlike large models where China was clearly half a generation behind the US at the start. One is whether this statement holds. Another clear feeling is that robots or general purpose robots are very cross-disciplinary, comprehensive things. Software, hardware, systems, engineering, supply chain, etc. The US does have congenital shortcomings in hardware supply chain for developing this, which is a big challenge for them.
My personal feeling is, unlike large models where we might be in a catching up phase, in embodied AI we might actually be leading. First, for embodied related complex hardware products, whether robot hardware platform or Dexterous hands, I think Chinese companies lead the world. At the brain layer, today US companies represented by Pi still have clear advantages in top talent, compute, and data. But as embodied brains further couple with hardware, whether in Dexterous hands or hardware platform dimensions, if future embodied AI research heavily couples with humanoid form factor or very complex hardware platforms, China's advantages will only amplify.
There's a variable here, exactly our next topic, progress on world models. You mentioned NVIDIA's world model approach is based on video generation models, which consume massive compute. Chinese companies generally have an order of magnitude less compute resources than the US big tech compared to US big tech, and fewer startups too. I think this might be a challenge for China. It's still very early, you don't know what else needs to be done in the future, and how much exploration Chinese companies will do on these future tasks.
First, I think world models and VLA probably represent the two main themes of embodied brain research. VLA uses text as backbone, representing human abilities to communicate, describe, and reason through language. World models use video as backbone, representing human visual intelligence.
Do you think these two are mutually exclusive?
They're complementary. Human intelligence relies on both language and vision. If humans lose either text or vision, we still have intelligence, but it's greatly limited. For robots, world models represent a very important visual understanding and generalization capability in human intelligence, applied to robot brains in a clever way.
Perfect time to expand on recent world model progress. One thing getting attention is NVIDIA's WAM World Action Model that they've been talking about since late last year through GTC. Can you explain how to understand world models first, since it's currently a pretty broad concept?
World models aren't new. If I define them, we have a model based on current observations that can predict what will happen in the future. That's a world model. This concept has been applied to many different scenarios. For example, in autonomous driving, Tesla's presentations mentioned they have a world model for autonomous driving simulation. When OpenAI launched Sora, they didn't call it a video generation model. Sora's definition was always a world model.
Right, there was lots of discussion about this when it first launched.
Sora made people feel like the model seemed to have understanding of physical laws. LeQun's system is also a world model, but he believes in his architecture. The physical world has more explicitly expressible rules to describe physical intrinsic information. When people face the world model concept, they have different interpretations based on their starting directions. In robotic scenarios, the most direct is through video generation. Through hallucination, we can predict how the physical environment will change due to our actions. It can be used for action simulation or policy generation. This is why we see world models as a new technical paradigm or new modality supplement compared to VLA.
Specifically for NVIDIA's Dream Zero and Dream Dojo, what specific contributions did they make under this approach?
Dream Dojo can be imagined as a video-based world model simulator. I can predict and render what the world will look like in the future based on current images, so it's like a simulator. Dream Zero can use video generation to output robot strategies and actions needed for current tasks and environments. NVIDIA's defined world action model is no longer a method based on description and observation directly outputting corresponding action sequences, but rather establishing causal reasoning through hallucination, generating what actions the robot should take to conform to world laws during this process. This departs from the VLA control paradigm centered on text and action cloning. If we compare human intelligence, text represents reasoning and thinking processes at lower frequency and higher complexity, while video represents intelligence that's more reactive, more real-time, more interactive with the environment. Both capabilities are indispensable for future general-purpose robots.
Then I have a vague understanding. Does it have a sense of time compared to previous VLA? Because VLA going directly from image to action, frame by frame, can't understand cause and effect.
I think that's a pretty accurate description. Why is VLA very limited as a motion generation model? Because essentially its underlying token description is a static state. Input is static images and text semantic descriptions. Why can it generate a sequence of actions? Because when training VLA, we often start with a VLM backbone, already trained on text and image understanding capabilities, while pasting a segment of joint movement information in the scene. So it's artificially mapping a sequence of actions onto text and image descriptions. Simply put, is action cloning with descriptions. That's why in the VLA paradigm, in a teleoperation scenario like folding a piece of clothing repeatedly on a tabletop, different fold creases are recorded through images, establishing some mapping with corresponding joint actions.
When you explain that difference, I thought of another episode we did on embodied AI evaluation. The guests were Gao Yang and Fan Haochang. Gao Yang is co-founder of Spirit AI. Fan Haochang is founder of Dexma. At the time, Dexma released an evaluation platform called Robot Challenge with a table 30 task set. One particularly tricky task was scanning QR codes. He told me no model could do it, because scanning QR codes isn't just about pointing actions at it to complete the whole task. You need to see the screen change to know you've scanned it. Without adding some external tools, none could do it.
First, VLA can add external tools, just like agents can add external tools today. But the more critical problem is VLA itself isn't predicting what will happen in the future, it's establishing a mapping. When you see such an image and text description, you should produce such a joint sequence. That's why its generalization is very poor. Sometimes you change a blue cup to red, or move a cup from left to right, and it might fail, because these sample distributions didn't exist in the behaviors it wanted to clone. But visual models have a major advantage. They are trained on broad video data with wider data distribution. If we can learn action patterns from broad data distributions and use them for motion simulation validation or motion policy generation, theoretically there's a higher ceiling.
What's Google doing this quarter? RT2 was originally the proposer of VLA. If everyone's focus has shifted to NVIDIA's WAM World Action Model, which might address many previous VLA defects, what's Google's new progress?
Google is going all in on video generation models. That's what we know. Or let me mention something else. At least what I know is Gemini Robotics research direction has very high overlap with Pi. They released Gemini 1.5 results last October or summer, which were very good at the time, clearly superior to Pi's results at the time. But if you look closely at why they achieved such good results, a very important reason is they had a better foundation model. They used Gemini as the foundation model, while Pi used the open source Polygemma, a clearly much smaller, much weaker open source model. We see a phenomenon in many Chinese embodied AI companies. If you switch to a better pre-trained language model without doing anything else, the final model performance gets better. So for a relatively clear research paradigm, Google has very obvious latecomer advantages. They can train better foundation models and directly benefit their VLA models. If they also train better video models, they can of course benefit their world action model very much.
That's assuming they decided it's worth going all in on.
Right, so I wouldn't be surprised if they become a catch-up player.
What are the immature aspects of NVIDIA's new world model approach? For example, I see it's very slow. Dream Zero runs at only 7 Hz on robots.
I think speed issues are all solvable. The core essence of computer science is we find the path first. As long as there's a path, we can always optimize. Just like DeepSeek can do extreme inference optimization, optimization is easy, but path exploration is hard. GPT 3.5 was also very slow at token generation when it first came out, but today's generation speed might be 100x, 1000x faster than then. Video models are still very early today, so slower inference speed is expected. I think the more critical point is that embodied AI has had a characteristic for years. We've highly benefited from large language model or VLM related research progress. Because we had better VLMs, we could train better VLLs. Because we had better video generation models, we could train better world models. So performance gains in these emerging fields at the foundation model level are determined by external forces.
It's driven from the outside.
So challenges world models face at current foundation model levels may not be solvable by their own efforts. But whether video generation models can truly fully obey physical laws, spatial consistency, long-term stability, I'm still quite confident as time progresses. We've also seen very rapid changes in images and video over the past few years. But even when world models reach a perfect state, we can hallucinate everything that might happen in the next 30 seconds with eyes closed. Tactile information is still missing, because the video modality naturally has no tactile signals. So after world models, how to fuse or enhance tactile information will be a very important future research direction.
This perfectly complements what you said earlier about why you think touch and dexterous hands are two very important directions. And this has to be solved by the embodied industry itself, not by foundation model vendors, because nobody had accumulated expertise before. The starting line is the same.
Or this is precisely what I see many startups doing. They know they might struggle to train a massive VLA and also struggle to pre-train a massive world model themselves, but they might be able to solve dexterous hand manipulation problems. Foundation models can't help solve this for me. I might solve the problem of combining touch with end effectors, because touch isn't just on dexterous hands, it can also be used on grippers, on Sunday-style grippers. This information wasn't available before.
This is a good observation, although this might not be a very easily observable phenomenon in industry now, because fewer big companies are doing this.
Big companies like things that scale. People are overly fixated on scaling law, all wanting to find a scalable approach. I think this principle is also right. Why is everyone so excited about world models? Wang Shengsheng also specifically mentioned at GTC this year that from Unitree's perspective, they might be more optimistic about the world model route, precisely because its theoretical ceiling is higher. We know that without vision, reading more text can't help you understand and describe many natural phenomena. But even if you're illiterate, don't understand any text, can't speak, you can still survive well in this world.
When NVIDIA proposed Dream Dojo and Dream Zero, they also talked about a new data framework, Ego Scale, saying it broke previous dexterous manipulation transfer scale bottlenecks using over 20,000 hours of egocentric human data.
That thing is mainly for training dexterous hand policies, somewhat like training a small model like R1. But that approach can be used for VLA or visual model.
Can all be used?
Yes, because they're all components of the entire data pyramid. If we think about this data pyramid, the most precise, highest quality data is definitely direct robot teleoperation data, because it accurately reflects every joint, every motor's reaction state in a task. On top of that are some robot-like architectures, like Yumi, which simulates gripper characteristics at the end effector, or Dex Yumi, which simulates dexterous hand mechanical structures at the end, but with open arms, perspectives, and other decals not constrained by robot hardware conditions. Egocentric is a lower layer, broader first-person manipulation data. Below that is broad internet YouTube data, which might not even be humans operating, might be various physical phenomena.
So NVIDIA's proposed Ego Scale data, it doesn't even use gloves.
It does use gloves. Ego Scale paper used Menu's gloves. After collecting data, you can apply this policy to a dexterous hand because it's 5-finger manipulation. But as pre-training data, it can be used for VAOA or world models. I think both work. It's not limited to one method to use for pre-training.
So you could say they propose two things. Data is decoupled and can be used on different model methods. At the same time, they propose new model progress and ideas.
Could say that, or rather the importance of ego scale-like data has heated up dramatically over the past 6 months, because people found more efficient ways to train first-person perspective data into VLAs or world models. People realized that to achieve sufficient motion generalization, we need more diverse data across all dimensions. Whether teleoperation or Yumi methods, data diversity was insufficient before. The main purpose of introducing ego scale methods is to increase data diversity.
Isn't direct internet video data the most diverse?
That's why there's the data pyramid concept. There's a data quality dimension. The big problem is that even first-person video has very open human joint and palm DOF, upper body DOF, and field of view freedom, while today's robots don't have this much freedom. So many actions learned from first-person video may not truly transfer to robots. This domain gap is huge. There are many wrist movements, finger movements that simply can't be learned. Of course, more flexible, more powerful hardware can reduce this gap, which is why we're developing high DOF dexterous hands rather than low DOF ones. But even with the best dexterous hands, robot upper limbs still have huge gaps versus human DOF, so ego-centric video is better than third-person YouTube video or even videos without people, but compared to Yumi data or teleoperation data, precision and data quality still have big gaps.
So if this pyramid has teleoperation at the top and internet video data at the bottom, closer to the top means more expensive, less quantity but higher quality, while going down is the opposite.
Right, so ego scale data might be slightly harder to obtain than YouTube data, but quantity is still very large. You just need a first-person camera, and with data gloves you have specific finger movements. Without them, you can still learn.
Is everything in this pyramid real data?
Not necessarily. It can also include simulated data. There are two types. The first is fully virtual environment modeling with accurate physics parameters or purely generated synthetic data. Quality-wise, that falls somewhere between ego-centric and Yumi data. The second is augmentation of real data. For example, augmenting Yumi data. That's also a form of simulation. So simulation is really a means to an end.
Do you think with NVIDIA's recent results, plus generalist new data solutions released last October, do these new solutions mean the data bottleneck is basically solved for embodied AI?
I don't think so. It's not that data problems are solved. but people see possible paths to solve data problems.
Now is the stage of seeing possibilities.
Speaking of Sunday, I think Sunday has had huge promoting effects on the industry. I know Tony and I've known Chengqi for quite a while. I really admire such entrepreneurs because they can really launch innovations and designs that don't exist in this world. Very clever, but in hindsight you realize makes total sense. Chengqi worked on the Yume approach back at Stanford. Yume was essentially his work at the time, then was improved by generalists and widely used for data collection. Sunday further expanded the two-finger Yume to 3 fingers.
Actually, Yumi is people holding an end effector to do some actions.
Isomorphic end effectors. Because once it's heterogeneous, there must be domain transfer losses. So it's isomorphic and 3-fingered with touch and feedback. By adding this 1 finger's DOF, many actions that grippers struggle with can be done through Sunday's 3 fingers.
Its isomorphism means it's isomorphic with its own robot hardware platform. The thing used for data collection is 3-fingered, and the robot also has a 3-finger end effector.
Right, they iterated many versions of that thing before converging on today's form. On this form, they can start collecting data at relatively low cost and large scale.
This is also what many Chinese companies are doing.
The benefit of Chinese companies is that once someone points out the path, our follow speed is very fast. But even in the past 6 months, as Yume approaches, including Sunday-like approaches, have rapidly emerged, their data scale and data cleaning, accurate annotations still need a long time. I don't think this will quickly reach data saturation. Actually, many Chinese embodied AI companies' goal this year is to achieve 1 million hours of real data collection through Yume-like methods. But I think it will still take time to truly obtain such large-scale data.
Do you think 1 million hours of data might be challenging? Because 1 million has to be effective.
Because you still need to clean and annotate. And even if you have 1 million hours of data, is it enough? I don't have that conclusion today.
Besides NVIDIA's recent results, what other new progress is there on world models across the industry? Like Google's Genie 3, Sima 2, do you want to talk about those?
Not directly related to robots. Google's Genie 3, including ByteDance, Cdance, these generation models or simulators, all benefit the robotics field indirectly. There's a specific detail, like Genie 3, it's a highly diffusion-based deep network pursuing visual high fidelity and appealingness. But compliance with physical environments is weak, not great for training physical interaction. Cdance is the same. For better visual effects, it highlights various artistic styles and visual expressiveness. It's not optimized for physical actions. To answer your earlier question, if video models need lots of compute in the future, could Chinese companies fall behind in this dimension? Let me share a particularly interesting piece of information. Today, basically the vast majority, if not all, robot visual models use Alibaba's open source 1, 2.1, or 2.2 as their foundation model.
So NVIDIA didn't train their own?
Right, they use 1, 2.1.
A company with that kind of resources didn't train one themselves, mainly because they didn't think it was necessary.
I think today is still unnecessary, still in the trial and research phase. Will they train their own in the future? Possibly. But for them, 1, 2.1 or 2.2 is accessible, widely debugged open source video generation models. But there are many criticisms. If you ask me about challenges world models face today, I've asked many researchers, and feedback is that whether 1, 2.1 or 2.2, they're fundamentally unsuitable for robot video generation.
Its original purpose wasn't for this, it's just that the open source options you can find are this.
It's the best. After that, nothing open source. So this might be another interesting question. The entire market's video generation model compute resource consumption is so large that today leading companies are unwilling to continue open sourcing. At least that's how it appears.
Because they feel this is something they invested lots of resources to do well, don't want to directly contribute it out?
Possibly also because commercialization is relatively early. From competitive logic, as long as I'm not number one, open source strategy can reduce the premium and advantage of leading companies. Just like DeepSeek and Kimi companies choosing open source strategies, open source is a good strategy for followers anyway, since your closed source models can hardly make money because you're not the most leading. So I think as video generation technology matures, there will still be vendors choosing to continue open sourcing.
Back to the earlier question, you said if everyone is using Alibaba's open source video generation models as their foundation now in the world model competition phase, could Chinese companies be at a disadvantage due to relatively less compute? I think it's still possible because you're talking about the current state.
Possibly. But if world models highly depend on SOTA video generation models, at least I don't think ByteDance's resources are that much less than Google's.
This also involves division of labor, the state you described earlier. like Alibaba's model being used by many embodied companies, but embodied companies themselves feel it's unnecessary or don't have resources to train a foundation video generation model. So these startups' development is actually quite limited by video generation model companies. One possibility is ByteDance does it themselves, and ByteDance is indeed doing it.
This is a problem all model companies face, regardless of what modality you work on. You could say long-term, an independent model company, whether large models, video models, or voice models, can't compete with the most resourced big tech because big tech's unified model can do everything, or they have enough resources to continue research. This problem always exists. If you talk to people at Google, they're true believers in this thesis.
Truly believe big tech will eventually do everything.
Right? Nobody can outdo them. This might be the endgame of the large model era. But even if this happens, I think for embodied AI companies and general purpose robotics companies that truly want to land applications, there's still plenty to do.
There's still lots of space and work they need to do on top of that.
Right? Of course, this boundary might become increasingly blurred, unlike iOS and Android where boundaries are very clear. But there's still a boundary because long-term domain know-how and data in specific scenarios are still the most valuable assets, and these aren't things every big tech company will possess.
Like NVIDIA's new direction, are there new entrepreneurial opportunities? I see new companies emerging in the US recently, raising lots of money.
Right, I happened to see Rhoda AI's announcement of $450 million in funding at GTC, a team doing world models as their entrepreneurial direction.
As a startup, do they do the video generation part of world models themselves, or also use open source models?
He didn't tell me specific details, but from what I gathered, even if they use open source generation models, they've also directly collected lots of egocentric data.
So they have their own data.
They're doing continued training. Some foundations might already be trained. Just like VLA, there are already some pre-trained models, like clip models you don't need to retrain yourself. You can continue training on top of that with lots of your own data.
Are there such new companies in China now? Not primarily VLA, but exploring embodied AI models through world models.
There are some, like Giga AI, they claim to be doing the world model approach.
Founded by Huang Guang, he was at Horizon before, then at Figent.
Right, but I'm really not familiar with how they're actually doing, because world model metrics and benchmarks should be very vague right now.
Also a very new direction, as an entrepreneurial direction.
A very new entrepreneurial direction. But this time I clearly felt people see the challenge of video generation model competition. The steepness is significantly higher than the VLA route. So many teams are thinking about how to face such a new technical paradigm.
People think it theoretically definitely has higher ceiling, but it's also definitely harder.
Definitely harder. And looking at it, at least today, it looks very big tech friendly.
The difficulty, besides needing lots of compute resources as you mentioned, what else is hard?
It's really that both data and compute consumption are huge. To train a good video generation model, you need enough very rich and diverse video data.
Even if I'm doing continued training based on an already open source model?
Collecting data is also massive. I chatted with someone from a domestic large model startup working on multimodal models before. They were also doing video generation models, and continuing was very stressful. He said copying several petabytes of data once might be a bill of several 100,000 RMB, doing nothing. This consumption is completely different from processing several TB of tokens.
On the other hand, although big tech seems to have lots of internet content, from a compliance perspective, can they directly use it? For example, I talked to Google people before. They said internally at Google wanting to use their own data sometimes feels more troublesome than outside startups with lots of compliance processes and legal issues.
But I found a coincidence. Today's 3 best video generation models are Google with YouTube, Huaishou with Clean, and ByteDance with Cdance. Actually, more critical is that all these good algorithm architectures and training recipes are built up through massive experiments and compute. This is a big challenge all embodied research startups face today. I don't have that much compute. What to do? Even if I have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of hours of data cleaned and annotated to train that model to train Pi 0.6, I need to do lots of experiments. How did my recipe come out? This needs compute to test. Many companies actually lack this resource.
Right, actually lacking experiments, quantity and scale of experiments.
All repeated experiments.
Everything we discussed earlier, including our rundown of Chinese and US companies, already covers the 5 developments you mentioned as most noteworthy. Next, I want to summarize some important infrastructure and commercial developments in the embodied field. One is compute. Actually, the industry discussed compute relatively less compared to large models, especially edge compute. We talked about training model compute earlier, also mentioned some edge situations. What's the current state of edge compute in embodied AI? Like the main chip on robots, which companies do people use?
Currently, if it's real-time inference on humanoid robots, the most default choice is probably NVIDIA's automotive chips.
NVIDIA's automotive chips, not the Jetson series, because NVIDIA has a robotics series.
No, Jetson compute isn't enough. It's the Orin series, or even higher Jetson Thor series. The core reason is today's compute needs are still very high. Jetson's positioning is awkward, not enough compute. And the logic is actually easy to think through. Today, those end-to-end autonomous driving companies wanting to compress a model real-time onto an Orin are already struggling. Embodied VLA or world models, model complexity won't be lower than autonomous driving models. So today we're completely not at the stage of saving compute within 1 to 200 watts power consumption. The best compute you can get is automotive chips.
So NVIDIA is still the infrastructure player in this field. No other companies? Like Qualcomm doesn't do this?
Currently, besides NVIDIA, a lot of Chinese robotics companies are actually partnering with Horizon.
Horizon, right? China does have a handful of chip companies that came up through autonomous driving.
Right. From mass-produced autonomous driving, maybe 40% is NVIDIA, 40% is Horizon. Other vendors have 20% market share. Very naturally, many people will use automotive chips on humanoid robots too.
So this opportunity could also belong to Huawei.
Potentially, Huawei still has considerable market share in high-level autonomous driving, but its challenge might be big tech prioritization issues. Because of sanctions limiting, massive chip capacity is prioritized for cloud chips and mobile chips. My understanding is automotive chips don't have enough priority.
Then robotics priority is probably even lower.
This is also the problem NVIDIA encounters. NVIDIA has completely dominant position in cloud GPUs, but in automotive it's not complete dominance.
Right, because Qualcomm has also been very aggressive in automotive, always talking about cockpit driving integration, lower cost, more cost-effective solutions.
Yes, down to robotics. NVIDIA's advantage might be further weakened because truly mass-produced robots really test cost, power consumption, and a series of factors. Today's embodied robots haven't reached scaled mass production, but if you look at other commercial robots, household robots, robot vacuums, drones, nobody uses Jetson solutions for mass-produced products. This means this market is open to other Chinese companies.
What are the main players in this market now, already doing at-scale mass-produced household robots?
The biggest is D-Robotics.
Horizon and D-Robotics.
Or rather, the biggest is D-Robotics, which is a company spun off from Horizon.
Right, D-Robotics is somewhat incubated by them.
D-Robotics focuses on compute for mass-market commercial and consumer robots. Then maybe some lower-end ones, like Allwinner, Rockchip, these traditional ARM chips, MCU chips. NVIDIA basically has zero market share here.
So from cloud to automotive to robotics, NVIDIA's dominance is increasingly weakened.
My summary of this problem is this is a typical innovator's dilemma. They make too much money in cloud. This problem is like Intel back then. Intel made too much money on PC and server, unwilling to make much cheaper mobile chips. In 2005, Jobs went to Intel hoping to do chips for iPhone. Intel refused, which ultimately gave birth to ARM's opportunity. I think today Horizon or D-Robotics faces the same opportunity. NVIDIA makes too much money in cloud. Automotive or robotics directions are completely not priorities internally.
There's another player, Tesla.
Tesla actually validated one thing. Elon very clearly expressed, future autonomous driving cars and Optimus robots will use the same chip optimized for the same chip from architecture, compute, power consumption, and other considerations.
So his choice also confirms there's good technical stack and scenario continuity from automotive to robotics.
This also means leading domestic autonomous driving chip companies will likely be strong competitors in the embodied era. Smart car era companies able to mass produce their own chips, including XPeng, Huawei, Li Auto, Xiaomi, etc., will also be strong compute solutions in the embodied AI era.
That's a lot of players you just named. But chip markets always consolidate eventually, right? There shouldn't be this many suppliers once things mature.
Historically, complex chips basically have two suppliers.
And it's 80-20 split, first place around 80%, second place around 20%.
Right? So very likely future embodied robot or humanoid robot chips will go through a very intense shakeout.
This hasn't happened yet, but we can keep watching over the next few years.
Right. Or rather, for any entrepreneur and investor, it's both huge opportunity and huge challenge. Humanoid robots might be a highly concentrated market. It's a general purpose, single architecture robot. If good enough, production and scale should be huge. which means winners will highly converge. Smartphones converge so much because human hands are shaped like this. Before iPhone, feature phones were very diverse. You could create different feature phones for different needs. Just like today's feature robots, sweeping, logistics, industrial. But once general-purpose robots form, it's likely a highly concentrated market.
But cars didn't converge that much.
Cars are still quite concentrated because of local industry protection, government subsidies, employment, and other considerations. Actually, global automotive industry is already highly concentrated. The US only has 3 car companies, Japan only 3, Korea only 1 or 2.
Europe also 3.
Right, and cars will concentrate further. As AI and autonomous driving become mainstream, as a software-hardware integrated carrier, its barriers and advantages will further amplify. The higher the complexity, the higher the barriers, the higher the software-hardware compounding, the higher the concentration must be. So I think smart cars or autonomous driving cars will definitely be highly concentrated in the future. Similarly, humanoid robots as the culmination of future human technology, concentration will definitely be very high. There shouldn't be so many humanoid robot companies. Of course, there might be different scenarios, 1.8M, 1.2M, male, female, but concentration should also be very high.
For startups, it's the more pragmatic path to do feature robots. Robots for specific scenarios, maybe not replaced by general-purpose robots.
Actually, that's exactly what some of the most successful young founders are already doing. Frank Wang built DJI around drones. Roborock did robot vacuums, and some companies did lawn mowers, warehouse robots, pool robots. Many young entrepreneurs are achieving entrepreneurship this way today.
Another related question, do you think feature robot companies could possibly evolve into general-purpose robot companies?
I think it's possible, but it will be a huge challenge and shock to people and organization. Like whether you believe an appliance company or traditional manufacturing company can build a robotics product or complex product, well, this is huge shock to entire company organizational culture and DNA.
I thought of an example, Apple. Apple was originally a computer company. Not all computer companies accomplished what Apple did later.
First, computers are already multitask products, and computers have very heavy software and algorithm components.
The drones and lawnmowers are also pretty complex software-hardware systems.
But they're single-task products. Single-task and multitask products are very different. Or a better question, the earliest calculator companies were HP and Texas Instruments, but they didn't evolve into home PC companies. Although calculators sold to millions of households.
HP doesn't count?
Doesn't count. It was an IBM-compatible PC assembly manufacturer. Didn't truly lead the personal computer revolution. Personal computers were driven by Apple and IBM PC.
I'm thinking, the company that ultimately claims the general-purpose robot crown, is it one that started with general-purpose robots from the beginning? Or could it be like DJI, like robot vacuums companies like that robot in Zima Blue, started as a pool robot, later became a person?
I think the company that ultimately claims the crown should be one that has accumulated and built relevant capabilities. If Sharper becomes a general-purpose robotics company one day, I wouldn't be surprised. A large part of robotics companies is optical, mechanical, electrical structure, precision engineering, mass production. These are all capabilities Sharper's team has been validated and honed over the past 10 years. For general-purpose robot success, they may already have 50% of the recipe, needing to fill in the other 50%. DJI could also succeed because DJI has the same production design and development capabilities as Sharper's team. But whether the missing 50% can be filled depends heavily on team learning ability and iteration ability.
On the other hand, companies strong in intelligence also need to fill in other things, and it's also possible to fill them in.
Possibly harder.
Then I roughly know your preference. Finally, let's talk about capital market changes in Q1. There's definitely a phenomenon that started in Q1 and will run through the year. China's embodied AI company IPO wave. Unitree has already submitted its prospectus, and I know many companies have also submitted. Regarding this IPO wave, what impact do you think it will have overall?
Very clear, robotics is a national-level strategic priority for China that may last a decade, whether hardware technology or software and algorithm brain technology. I think Unitree's IPO should open a new stage for very competitive, globally competitive Chinese companies. From a market perspective, I think it's a major tailwind for these startups and investors.
You think it's positive for startups? I think on one hand it might be positive. Like if the secondary market sentiment is very strong, it will be a tailwind. But on the other hand, resources might concentrate towards the top players. That's also possible.
Concentration toward leading companies isn't a bad thing, just like electric vehicles.
Right. I think it's not bad for the entire industry. I'm talking about other startups.
Or rather, for startups, the wealth effect of successful entrepreneurship is the fundamental driving force that pulls more people into the market to start businesses and invest. Having proven benchmark companies will attract more talent and capital into the field. I've recently talked to the smartest young people and students at Tsinghua, Peking University, SJTU, Fudan. Maybe half of them are working on embodied AI, similar to how half of the smartest brains were working on AI in the past 2 or 3 years. At least this is better than 2012, when China's best brains were thinking about how to improve advertising conversion rates.
Right. That's one way to think about it.
From the perspective of the country's development stage or technology development rhythm, today has arrived at the time when Chinese enterprises and scholars can lead the world's development frontier. We need to shift from a fast follower mindset into an innovation-first rhythm. This is first. Second, from the timing point of embodied development itself, many relevant elements are also in place. Large model technology maturation, generation technology maturation, even AI compute, data centers and other infrastructure maturation all have brought embodied technology to such a tipping point. So more resources and brainpower gathering towards these directions that might have breakthroughs and outputs isn't a bad thing. As an investor myself, as a VC who deeply believes in alpha investing theory, I'm definitely very wary of bubbles and market hype. This is probably instinct after years of investing. But standing from the perspective of national macro development and strategy, this is an excellent opportunity for China to lead the world. We already have the foundation of electric vehicles, the foundation of AI, and breakthroughs in semiconductors and compute. Why can't we truly lead the world in embodied AI or general purpose robotics? The reward is so tempting. So whether capital markets or when I go to Tsinghua and Peking University, you can see huge energy accumulating.
So you think Unitree's IPO will push this boom even further?
Right? And from a personal perspective, Unitree is a very high-quality commercial company. It's not a bubble company, not a concept company. It has real user value, real revenue, and is also a very efficiently operated company. Its IPO is at least more representative than many other embodied companies going public.
Right. Many companies have started this process now, and I think there's also a possibility regulators might not let so many embodied AI or robotics companies all go public. There will be some overlap and homogeneity. If some companies succeed in going public and some don't, I think it will also impact primary market investment and entrepreneurship enthusiasm.
Definitely. Many investors' goal is still hoping companies can successfully go public and exit. If you know there's no IPO expectation, many people really won't invest.
So there's still quite a lot of uncertainty going forward. How capital markets will change this year?
I think the more critical thing might still be development speed. Analogous to so many winters and cycles AI has experienced, markets tend to have excessive expectations for short-term technology changes. Although we've been doing robotics research and investment for so many years and have seen tech cycles hot and cold, today's embodied AI wave is indeed a frenzy. Market expectations will definitely adjust in the future. I think this might have bigger impact and adjustment on the market than whether companies can go public in the short term.
When do you think this phenomenon of so much money pouring into startups and primary markets might relatively calm down or end?
It's hard for me to judge market sentiment, especially fellow investors' sentiment.
Is this current situation beyond your expectations?
Definitely beyond expectations. I ran the numbers. Today in China, there should be over 20 humanoid or embodied AI companies valued at over 10 billion RMB or $1.5 billion. For comparison, at the peak of large model hype in 2023 to 2024, there were only 4 or 5 large model companies valued at over 10 billion RMB. We clearly see today that large models have very clear commercialization and industry application opportunities. From Anthropic, OpenAI's revenue, you can see people are rapidly embracing and utilizing new technology. But embodied AI really landing still needs a long time. Unitree as the clear leader only has $200M plus revenue. But this market now has 20 companies valued over 10 billion. And I think this will take some time to absorb and shake out.
Then finally, summary and outlook. What are you relatively certain will happen in the next quarter to 6 months?
A few things. First, world models are rapidly becoming an industry research hotspot. Whether Chinese or US companies who can produce demos or results significantly surpassing Pi's current VLA technical route, that's something to look forward to. Second, also the dexterous hands we mentioned. With more researchers having high DOF dexterous hands with tactile signals, will there be more dexterous manipulation results in the next quarter or two? Also very much worth looking forward to. Another very interesting thing that might happen in the next month, the Beijing Yizhuang humanoid robot competition. Why interesting? Because when this competition was held last year, many people thought it was a gimmick. Maybe only a few companies would participate. But today, the information I have is that probably all the major humanoid robot companies in China are going all out preparing for this competition. I think such a high-density, high-competition event like F1 in the automotive industry will catalyze bursts and breakthroughs of many frontier technologies and solutions.
Right? And then maybe later trickle down to more mass-produced versions. F1 has that logic.
Yes, I think future humanoid robot games will be F1 in the robotics field. Faster, better, further.
I hadn't thought about it from this angle before. In the early days, people mostly watched with a mindset of watching a spectacle.
People thought it was a publicity stunt. But I think many humanoid companies are aired up after the gala. Everyone wants to prove they're not inferior to Unitree or have abilities surpassing Unitree in certain areas. Such an open, fair athletic competition is the perfect stage for teams to push their technology to the absolute limit. And as an activity citizens can understand and appreciate, its performance significance and publicity significance are both very important.
Then one last question. I want you to share a question you think is very important right now, but you still don't know the answer to.
Is humanoid the optimal solution for future general-purpose robots? Or will future general-purpose robots diffuse into many forms and working methods?
Do you currently lean toward humanoid being the optimal solution?
I think I still have no answer on humanoid. There was lots of skepticism before, but I have no answer today.
So you previously leaned more toward the second option. There will be many different robot form factors in the future.
Right, just like we have cars and planes.
More dispersed. Humanoid is just one part. But now you feel this answer is more uncertain.
For myself, it's probably more uncertain. Having witnessed decades of robotics development history, I'm not a simple or blind technology optimist because we know this is very hard, but we also very much understand that technology breakthroughs are nonlinear. When passing a critical point, it might truly enter a positive acceleration environment. Can we break through that critical point? Or is that critical point forever unreachable due to physical constraints, mechanical structure constraints, motor structure constraints, energy structure constraints? I don't have a very clear answer today. What I can see is the entire world, the entire country's resources, brainpower, compute pouring into this market, trying to solve the hardest problems. So it's hard for me to guarantee this problem can be solved in 5 or 10 years. I probably feel even more uncertain today.
We can note this question down. Next quarter, we can see what new questions there are and also review previous questions to see if answers have changed.
This might also relate to large model development. From ChatGPT to today, large models have already gone through 3 or 4 years of development. People's shifting expectations about when AGI will arrive, how far AGI is, has also been a process. But eventually people may become increasingly rational or increasingly optimistic. I think general-purpose robotics, humanoid robots, will go through the same process.
Then thank you very much, Peter, for joining LateTalk today, sharing the 5 most important embodied AI industry developments or events in Q1. We also went through these developments one by one, including progress on humanoid robots like Unitree's performance and Galbot's tennis demo with full humanoid robots, including Chinese companies and US companies like the challenges Optimus faces and Figure's progress in the US. Then I think a very important point we also covered was world models. This is now a very hot topic as a replacement or evolution of VLA, with new startups emerging like Rhoda AI that showed up after flying under the radar for a year with $450 million in funding, and a similar startups appearing in China. For myself, there was lots of extra insight on the Dexterous hands section. It might have a G1-like opportunity in the future, and Dexterous hands, Dexterous manipulation, and introduction of touch also bring many new changes to both model and hardware progress. Finally, we also briefly touched on the embodied AI IPO wave that might be coming soon. That's it for today's show. Bye everyone.